Hi YouTube family. Welcome back to Hanging with Herfa. Many elderly people suffer mistreatment from those who are supposed to take care of them. This should never happen to people who have spent most of their lives making sacrifices and always putting their family's needs before their own. Too many of them have heard these crushing words that sears their very souls. I wish you would die already. Some family members have deliberately withheld life-giving medications from family members to hasten their demise. Imagine that happening to you. Sometimes I have to wonder if these evil people don't know they will get old and the money they go to such lengths to steal, that they may not even live long enough to enjoy it. These are real stories that show just how terrible elder abuse can be. Let's dive into these 5 scary true stories of elder abuse. Story 1. The neglected grandmother. Let's start with Mary, a sweet grandmother who loved her family dearly. Her children hired a caregiver named Lisa to look after her while they were at work. At first, Lisa seemed friendly and attentive. But soon, things took a dark turn. Lisa started neglecting Mary's basic needs. She would leave Mary alone for hours without food, water, or even a bathroom break. Can you imagine? Over time, Mary became weaker and weaker. One day, Mary's daughter, Sarah, came home early and found her mother in a terrible state. Mary was extremely weak, dehydrated, and clearly malnourished. She was sitting in soiled clothes, unable to help herself. Sarah was shocked and angry at her mom's condition. How could this be happening to her mom without her noticing? She felt deep guilt, as all this had been taking place while she was busy going out to work early and coming back too late to pay attention to her beloved mom. How could she ever forgive herself? Sarah was horrified and rushed Mary to the hospital. The doctors said Mary was severely dehydrated and undernourished. Sarah reported Lisa to the authorities, and an investigation was launched. Mary slowly recovered, but the emotional scars she suffered remained not only with her, but Sarah, her daughter, as well. Story 2. Financial Exploitation of Grandpa Joe. Next, we have Grandpa Joe, a friendly old man who loved gardening and spending time with his grandchildren. His family hired a caregiver named Tom to help him with daily activities and manage his finances. Tom seemed very nice and helpful at first, but he had a hidden agenda. Tom slowly gained Joe's trust and convinced him to give him access to his bank accounts. Joe, trusting Tom completely, agreed. Over the next few months, Tom started stealing money from Joe's accounts. He would withdraw large sums and use Joe's credit cards for personal purchases. Joe didn't notice the missing money at first because he trusted Tom completely. But soon, he started receiving letters about unpaid bills and overdue accounts. Joe was confused and worried. His family noticed something was wrong when they saw Joe stressed and anxious about his finances. Joe's son, Mike, decided to look into it. He discovered that thousands of dollars were missing from Joe's accounts. They confronted Tom, who denied everything, but the evidence was clear. Mike reported Tom to the police, and he was arrested for financial exploitation. Joe was heartbroken that someone he trusted so much could betray him like that. He felt violated and ashamed. His family supported him through the ordeal and helped him regain control of his finances. Story 3. The Isolated Elder. Now, let's talk about Mr. Thompson, a retired teacher who loved reading and chatting with his neighbors. After his wife passed away, his children hired a caregiver named Emily to keep him company and help with daily chores. Emily was cheerful and seemed to enjoy her job. However, after a few months, Emily's behavior changed. She started isolating Mr. Thompson from his friends and family. She moved him to a remote part of town, away from his familiar surroundings. Emily wouldn't let Mr. Thompson make phone calls or have visitors. She controlled every aspect of his life, making him feel trapped and alone. Mr. Thompson's children noticed they were having a harder time reaching him. When they called, Emily would make excuses, saying Mr. Thompson was busy or resting. They grew suspicious and decided to visit him unannounced. What they found was shocking. Mr. Thompson looked tired and sad. He told his children how Emily wouldn't let him see anyone or talk to his friends. He felt like a prisoner in his own home. His children were furious and immediately fired Emily. They reported her to the authorities for elder abuse. Mr. Thompson's children moved him back to his old neighborhood, where he could reconnect with his friends and enjoy his hobbies. He slowly recovered from the emotional trauma of being isolated. Story 4. Physical abuse of Mrs. Smith. Mrs. Smith's story is a difficult one. She was a kind and gentle woman who loved baking and spending time with her grandchildren. After a fall, she needed help with daily activities, so her family hired a caregiver named Rita. She seemed caring and attentive, but behind closed doors, she was a monster. Over the years, she was able to build trust with the family, so when Mrs. Smith complained to her daughter, and the daughter asked Rita about it, of course, she vehemently denied it. Her explanation to the accusations was that Mrs. Smith was suffering from dementia and therefore her accounts could not be taken as the truth. Rita had been physically abusing Mrs. for a long time. This abuse became part of her daily life. The caregiver would hit her when she made a mistake or didn't comply with her demands fast enough. Even though the family visited fairly often, Rita made sure she was never far from Mrs. Smith while they were there, fussing over her, pretending to be making sure she was comfortable. Rita would regale the family with amusing stories of something funny that happened while she would cast veiled, threatening looks at Mrs. Smith. It was a look that warned her that if she said anything about the abuse, she would just get more of the same when the family left. Mrs. Smith was petrified, so she would pretend Rita was the best caregiver ever. There came a time when Rita needed someone to stay with Mrs. Smith while she took a break, so Judy was hired. Judy was nice and friendly and would listen attentively to what Mrs. Smith had to say. She prepared delicious meals for her and would sit with her as she ate, talking and laughing as she made sure Mrs. Smith was drinking enough water and eating enough of her nourishing food. Judy had noticed that Rita was not happy about how close she and Mrs. Smith had become and started doing and saying things to discourage that rapport they had. Whenever possible, she would create a reason for Judy not to come into work. Of course, it was never a valid reason. Rita suspected that Mrs. Smith was telling Judy of the abuse, so she made sure the family never visited when Judy was there. After making Judy out to be incompetent and careless, Rita, dismissed her, not the family. Judy was heartbroken as she felt terrible that she was not in a position to help Mrs. Smith. Rita had made sure that Judy never met Mrs. Smith's family and had no way to contact them. If you want to learn more about how to properly care for the elderly and protect them from abuse, I recommend checking out my book, Cherishing the Elderly, A Guide to Caring for Grandpa and Grandma. Let's make sure our seniors are treated with the dignity they deserve.